Our next speaker is a Canadian patient advocate, Gail Attara, co-founder, president, and CEO of the Gastrointestinal Society. Her motto is "The patient comes first," and to that end, she works to support patient-focused healthcare and increase awareness about the seriousness of gastrointestinal illnesses. Gail also leads the Biosimilars Working Group, an umbrella group of patient advocacy organizations that advise Canada's federal and provincial governments on biosimilar policies from the patient perspective. Today, Gail will talk with us about some of the biosimilar policies that are affecting patients in Canada. In particular, she will talk about the controversial forced biosimilar substitution policies that some Canadian provinces are using to increase biosimilar uptake. These policies are in stark contrast to many policies in place around the world. For example, in Europe, physicians have far greater control over treatment decisions, and savings are achieved through competition. As Gail will discuss, these forced substitution policies have raised serious concerns among Canadian patient groups and physician organizations, particularly in the gastroenterology space.
Thank you for inviting me to do this recap of the Canadian biosimilars journey. So in Canada, it's really important for you to understand that we do have universal medical health care, but that's only for physician visits and hospital use. It's not for medications. And so in Canada, we have a very tightly managed, variable by jurisdiction, limited publicly funded drug coverage. So that's the context in which I'm going to say the rest of this talk. And we are also the only country in the world with pharma-provided patient support programs for biologic medications. Again, it's going to be very key as I sort of unfold what's going on in Canada, so you'll be able to see. Because the downside is that when you change your biologic medication, some of your healthcare team changes, and that's really going to be key in how patients have responded to switching. So we've been active in this area since 2013. In Canada, we originally called this subsequent entry biologics, and I spoke at a CADTH conference in 2013. Now, CADTH is our health technology assessment body. So I spoke at that point about the concerns patients were having with medication changes and what these biosimilars and the implications for them in Canada ongoing. Then we created some patient information pamphlets so that we could give some education. These are available on our website, and we hand them out printed. Hundreds of thousands of these have gone across Canada to educate the public about what biologics and biosimilars are. So the switching and substitution are the two key words we're going to be talking about. And switching, everybody knows that when you're on a medication throughout your life in having medications, you've switched medication, and that's okay. It happens all the time, but that's because perhaps your medication wasn't working and your physician wants to try something else. So that in that case, it's a medical switch. There's a reason for it. But what we're going to be talking about is non-medical switch, and that's vitally not okay because it usually happens, it could happen with the consent of your physician or without, but it's usually for reasons not related to your health and the care of you. And then in Canada, we also have substitution at the pharmacy level, where a pharmacist can substitute. Not every jurisdiction in Canada allows this, but a pharmacist can substitute it right at the pharmacy counter. So you walk up with a prescription for a specific product, and the pharmacist can substitute that. So in 2015, we did a survey to find out what those in our therapeutic area, so we did this just for inflammatory bowel disease, and what they knew and understood about what was then called subsequent entry biologics. And so this is the outcome from this, was that we asked them, how important is it to you for your physician to have the sole authority to decide? And as you can see, 78% said very important, 17% said somewhat important. And, this was really a key sort of learning point for us. And we wanted to understand what our patient population wanted. And that was a number of 354 on this. Then we asked them, how concerning would it be for you if the pharmacist or government or your private insurance plan made the determination which biologic you were on? And again, people are saying, that no, they're not. It's very important that and so they're very concerned about this on initiation of treatment. So this is just if you're naive to any kind of medicine, and that's what the question was asked. So then we went and asked, what about during your treatment? If you're in the middle of treatment, you're on a biologic, an originator biologic, and then now you have to switch. And as you see, the numbers just shot through the roof. So we had a total of 96% really who was important to. And so based on this and the information that we got from patients, we had this sort of moral authority to go ahead and act on behalf of those inflammatory bowel disease patients who we were representing. And so we also went to the European Crohn's and Colitis Organization conference in Amsterdam in 2015 and presented this data in a poster that was accepted there. And it's interesting that the group right beside us who was presenting was a patient group from Europe, and they had almost identical results. We were going through things question by question, and the results, we didn't even know this. We didn't organize it in advance. So it was showing that this was really an honest perception of patients really around the world. Then we created a video in 2016. This is available on our website in both English and French. It's still valid. Everything that's in it is still true. So we really thought about the future and how things might play out in this whole biosimilars area. Then we formed the Canadian Biosimilars Working Group. And it had so this is here I've listed who are current members of this group, and the website you can go to find more information. But the reality is that we have switched participants throughout the course of time. Some oncology groups were part of it, and they're not now. Oncology is handled quite differently in Canada than some of the other therapeutic areas. And so the number of different groups that we've had have varied over time. So then we created a focus group in 2017 for biosimilars with a total of 5 groups. And we also had several cross-country focus groups that were really intense in person, where the viewers are behind the screens listening to the participants talk about what their experiences are. And we learned a lot during that. And it's really interesting that survey, we got 657 participants in just 2 weeks. And the majority of them were in Crohn's and colitis, because although the Arthritis Society did lead that, we were active participants and were able to generate those kinds of participants in that. And the key findings from that was that this was before switching occurred in Canada. And so people were just hearing about it, wondering what it would be like and what the experience would be going forward. So there was a great emotional impact from the disease. They're thinking about the processes that you already have to go through in Canada to get your drug approved. And that this was the first time that this kind of mass switching was going to happen. And so we were really in a trial and error experiment. And so anxiety was high. There was poor understanding of what was going to happen. Most were opposed to this forced non-medical switching. It just didn't seem very Canadian, if you want to sort of go at the Canadian way of doing things. And it really was counter to anything that we had done before. And so there was also great concern that switching would reopen access and coverage questions. And just to tell you about who regulates drugs in Canada, we have Health Canada. They're the regulator. And even they came forward and said that the authorization of a biosimilar is not a declaration of equivalence in Canada, and that although they expected no differences in safety and efficacy, they still say, the Health Canada still says that the decision should be made by the treating physician. So that's our regulator. And then we have a health technology assessment bodies, and they even said that so CADTH is the national one in Canada, and INES is Quebec only. It's really driven to identify what's going on in that province, although other provinces do rely on the information that INES generates. It's a really good body. They thoroughly assess things, and it is a reputable source, as is CADTH. So CADTH said that the individual patients and their practitioners should make those decisions about switching, and INES says that there are significant concerns that clinicians have about non-medical switching, and they should be considered. So even our regulator and our health technology assessment bodies are all saying, we're not saying you have to switch. However, and then here's some of the medical associations too. So the medical associations, I've only picked 2 here, although they all have position statements. The Canadian Association of Gastroenterology, who we really work closely with, do not recommend non-medical switching. And then the Canadian Rheumatology Association says that they're a little softer, and they say that it must be respectful and informed conversation between the rheumatologist and their patient, and that there should be no substitution without an informed consultation. So that's it. And I mean, there were a lot of other patient associations who have position statements too, but they're all kind of similar. So I'm just going to talk about what happened in Canada very, very briefly, very high level. So Canada's non-medical switch policies. British Columbia was the first province. It's the third largest province. It happens to be where I live. And they announced a hard switch in 2019 in May for certain disease areas, for rheumatoid arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, plaque psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, and one medication for diabetes, not all medications. And then later that year, they announced it for Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. Just one thing I wanted to go back and just talk briefly about is that it was a really hard policy, no exceptions, just you got to do it, and that's it. And it really generated a lot of concerns, which I'll get to in a few seconds. So Alberta, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia are three smaller provinces, and they had some modified switch policies with some exceptions during the pandemic. And Quebec last year came out with a switch policy that offered a year to switch, and there were exceptions that we had a hand in helping them modify their policies. So I'm much more comfortable now with the policy as it is in Quebec, whereas British Columbia's policy still was never a good policy. And Ontario, Canada's largest province, is considering a switching policy, but it's been delayed by the pandemic and politics, because we know politics plays an important part in all of this. So then we did another survey in 2020, and this was the response demographics. Still a lot of individuals with inflammatory bowel diseases of Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, but as you can see, there were a lot of other individuals as well. And we also had, in addition to the survey responses, we had more than 100 calls and emails to our office. And so those were all compiled into this report. The bottom line was that there were a lot of delays, lack of communication. There were people showing up to support programs. Remember, the patient support programs in Canada are run by the pharmaceutical companies, and you go there, you change your drug, you change your program, and so they might not have been ready for you for that change to occur. And so there was lack of coverage for issues related to the biosimilar. It was just a gong show. There were some key issues, though, and I won't dwell on these too much, but they're very important, is that 66% said there was some kind of mental health component related to this. And there were timing issues, and there was generally still a lack of biosimilar education, even with the tools that we have in place. But they would go to their physicians and they would just be told you have to switch without really it being explained. And some more key issues were that there were exclusive contracts with these patient support programs, and the high denial rate when physicians asked for special authority to remain on the originator biologic, they were rejected. Basically, straight out, the provinces just said, nope, sorry, you can't, there's no exception. And these are the things that were really brutal. And this is why I'm really glad that Quebec has adopted an exception program. So it's really hard when a government policy just forces you to do something that really, we're all individuals and we should have that flexibility for care. And still, most respondents were now familiar with biologic medications, which is really good. It means we are explaining to them what the biologic medications are, but still the individual policies that have rolled out in the provinces are not that explained. And they still believe, though, that their physician should have the sole authority to decide the best biologic medicine for their disease. So even if they're familiar with it, they understand everything. The bottom line is the position hasn't changed really from when we began this journey. Now, we did one final survey that I'm going to mention, and that was in 2021. It was a smaller survey, really drilling down to what was going on in the two provinces, Alberta and British Columbia, that had changed their policies the earliest. And some quotes were really good and positive. So it was positive, so far, so good, and the same as the original. There was this whole thing about the biologic and biosimilar for the adalimumab product. Some had a product in it that made it sting, and some of them did not. So some biologics Originator biologics, they changed their formula and it didn't sting anymore. And now the new one stung when injected. So these are really important just at the patient level and how important that is. And then side effects. So they did range, but really it was too soon to tell with the adalimumab product in these provinces. And the majority were not confident in their ongoing care. I think that's really important. There was never enough time to switch. There was scheduling difficulties, communication problems, with the overlaying confounding factor of the pandemic. And then our biosimilar position has always been that they should set one price for reimbursement for all originator biologics and their respective biosimilars. They're not going for that. If the lowest cost alternative happens in all kinds of small molecules all the time, and we think it could have actually expanded to the large molecules, but there is no appetite for this in any of our jurisdictions. And so we then came out with some compromise papers, and these are available on our website as well, policy documents. We did good biosimilar policy in Canada, what that looks like, some exclusion examples, and also we debunked a whole bunch of myths around non-medical switching, and you're welcome to just have a look at badgut.org. And so those, I'll just highlight what those are, what we think are important, and Quebec adopted to these also, is that provide a longer time frame for switching children and be cautious in elderly patients and transferring individuals from pediatric to adult care. We wanted exceptions for those with severe disease and other high-risk patients, which we also defined in our paper. We wanted exclusions for mental health. And I think that we have to respect the fact that mental health is a big issue and it doesn't just go away on its own. Individuals need attention and care for this, and mental health has to be a factor in any kind of policy decision. And of course, pregnant women. And we had one more thing in Canada, being the geographic size of our country, is that there were logistical and geographic considerations that really are in place in accessing care. When the patient support programs came up for the biosimilars, not all of them were in the same locations as the originator biologic patient support programs were. And so we had to really make huge adaptations. So that's basically the journey in Canada. And I thank you for listening, and thank you for your part in all this. And thank you for taking the time to learn about what's going on in the rest of the world for biologics, originator biologics, and biosimilars.
Thank you, Gail. We appreciate the great work you're doing in raising awareness of these issues and all that you do to make sure biosimilar policies are working for patients. There are certainly lessons we can all learn from the Canadian biosimilar experience.